Okay, and welcome. You should have just finished your video over plant cells. And now I am going to get into the structure, specifically the structure of what we call eukaryotic cells. In the previous lesson, last class, we talked about the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Is there a nucleus present, and is the genetic material contained in that nucleus? And also, are there smaller structures called organelles that help with cell function? So that is where we're going to start at, and that's what we are going to get through today. So at the end of this, your learning objective should be able for you to identify the main characteristics of a eukaryotic cell. And again, this first part, we're going to be discussing the difference between plant and animal cells. So what are the characteristics of a eukaryotic cell? They have a surrounding membrane. That membrane is semi-permeable, okay, meaning it allows certain things to pass through while others cannot get through. It is filled with cytoplasm. This contains a fluid, or is made up of a fluid, and also contains all the tiny little structures that we will be talking about here. Those structures are called organelles, which literally means tiny organs. Okay, so just like you have special organs that function in your body, there are tiny little structures that have specific functions inside the cell. And finally, there is a nucleus, a control center, and that is where our genetic material is. Okay, so those are the primary characteristics of a eukaryotic cell. As we mentioned in the previous class, prokaryotic cells do not have organelles or a nucleus. They do have a membrane, they are filled with cytoplasm, but the genetic material just floats and around in that cytoplasm and has a particular shape. Okay, now as we move on, we're going to actually get into cell structure. As we do that, you're going to see here we are going to be comparing animals and plant cells. There are some minor differences between those. Okay, as we go through, here is a picture of each with the animal on the left and the plant cell on the right. You can see shape being one of the distinguishing characters. There are also a few differences in organelles. So that is what I would like to go through first here. Okay, so let's look at the animal cell. It is irregular or round shape. The reason for this is it does not have a cell wall. Okay, it does not have a cell wall. It is not box-shaped. Animal cells do have special structures that plant cells do not have. They are called centrioles. You will learn these centrioles are very important to cell division. We'll talk about cell division much later in the year. Animal cells, if they have vacuoles, those vacuoles are generally very, very small in size. And finally, animal cells cannot carry out photosynthesis because they have no chloroplasts. Okay, so that is your animal cell. Your plant cell, on the other hand, is rectangularly shaped because it does have a cell wall. We talked about the cell wall when we did our macromolecules. Cell wall is made up of a special polysaccharide called cellulose. That cellulose gives it a distinctive shape to the plant cell, and also is what allows certain plants like trees and so forth to get very, very large. Plant cells do not have centrioles to help with cell division. Okay, so that is another characteristic or another way that plant cells and animal cells are different. There will always be a vacuole in a plant cell. It is called a central vacuole, and it is very, very large. It contains mostly water, and this helps to create something called turgor pressure. And again, this helps with the structure of the cell and allows certain plants to maintain a rigid shape and get bigger. One of the distinguished things about plant cells is they do have special organelles called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts contain a pigment called chlorophyll that can absorb sunlight. Okay, so this allows plant cells to make their own food. Okay, so big, big difference between animal cells and plant cells, the presence of chloroplasts. Now, let's actually get into the structure of the cell. And as I said, we are doing eukaryotic cells here. Prokaryotic cells are much simpler and do not have all these parts. And like the videos we showed, or I showed, I am going to start from the inside out. So, what should you be able to do? You should be able to, by the time you go through this, identify and give the function of each part of a eukaryotic cell. That is what I would like you to be able to do. You will be doing some worksheets, some gizmo to help reinforce all of this. Okay, first on the list, and if we start in the middle, we are going to have our nucleus. This is our control center. Okay, this is our control center. This is where we find our genetic material. Okay, the membrane is a double membrane. That means there are two layers to it. It is called the control center because it contains the genetic material, which is used to control everything else that goes on in the cell. Inside the nucleus, the genetic material spends most of its time as a material called chromatin. It is completely unwound, very thin strands. Again, that is called chromatin. Most people think of the genetic material being in what we call chromosomes. Chromosomes actually only occur or show up right when a cell is getting ready to divide. What happens is the chromatin winds itself up as tight as it can, and it forms these individual chromosomes that pair up. Okay, and this does allow the genetic material to get divided up as two new cells get formed. Also, inside the nucleus is a very, very important structure called the nucleolus. And the nucleolus is important in that it produces a very special organelle called a ribosome. And as we'll learn as we go through these different parts, the ribosome is very, very important to us and all living things. Now, as I said, the nucleolus, most cells will have two or more. You can see in the picture there the big nucleolus inside the nucleus. It directs the synthesis of RNA, and it also forms ribosomes. Now, RNA is one of the nucleic acids that we mentioned earlier when going over our macromolecules. DNA is very important in getting the genetic code out of the nucleus and to the ribosomes. Okay. And it also forms those ribosomes that will be helping decode our genetic message and make all the different proteins that we are going to need in order to survive. The nuclear envelope or nuclear membrane, as I said, is double membrane. It is porous, meaning that materials are able to pass in and out. That's how the ribosomes make it out and into the cytoplasm. And basically, it has a very important job of separating the nucleus from the rest of the cell. And by doing that, it can contain the genetic material inside the nucleus. Okay, so that should take care of the inside part, or the nucleus, the nucleolus, and nuclear membrane. Now, let's move on out. And outside the nucleus, we find what is called the cytoplasm. This cytoplasm is a viscous fluid, mostly water. It contains the organelles, or all the little tiny organs that have little jobs to perform for the cell. It is also made up of filaments and fibers, microtubules, microfilaments made from proteins. The fluid itself is called cytosol. Okay. And again, as I mentioned, we have the organelles, and we have some what are called storage substances. So this is the cytoplasm. What we're going to do as we go through here is talk about the different types of organelles, the filaments, the fibers, the cytoskeleton, and all of that. Okay, so the first thing, as I mentioned here, I'm going to talk about are all those microtubules and microfilaments. Okay, and then you also have something called intermediate filaments, but they are very similar. Okay, they're microfilaments that have wrapped themselves around each other, and they form what is called the cytoskeleton. Okay, again, made out of filaments and fibers. There are three primary ones. There is the microfilaments, the microtubules, and the intermediate filaments. You can see there in the picture on the right, and they have three very, very important functions. First and foremost, they give mechanical support. Okay, what does that mean? That means that it helps the cell to maintain its shape. Okay, it keeps it from squashing in on itself or moving, stretching apart too much and all that. They also help to anchor the organelles and keep the organelles from moving all around and running into each other and destroying each other. So they help in the anchoring of certain organelles. And they also help in the movement of substances. We're going to learn about things called vesicles. There's little organelles that help move stuff around from place to place. Okay, they help in the movement of the cytoplasm, which in turn helps with the movement of certain substances from place to place inside the cell. Now, this is the first of a few little PowerPoints that you're going to have. I am limited by time here, how much I can put each one. Okay, so I'm going to end this one right here, move on to the next one where we will start talking more about the other little structure.